Mr Fraser and Ms Harris, and with officers of the Climate Change Authority. Mr Fraser, would you like to make an opening statement?
No, we have no opening statement, thank you.
Okay, well I'll throw to Senator Milne.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. I just wanted to start with funding. The 2014-15 budget didn't provide any new funding for the authority. So how much money do you have left over from previous years to carry out your statutory functions?
It's a pretty complicated answer, Senator, which I'll readily delegate to Anthea and to Michael.
Senator, thank you. We have about $3.4 million in terms of unspent funding, and there were from previous appropriations that we had not spent, and there was also an amount that was provided to the Environment Department to carry on the functions of the authority in the event that we were abolished, and that's funding that we're currently drawing on at the moment as well.
And what's that allocation?
That was 3.5 million.
So you've got 3.4 that was unspent previously and 3.5 in an account in the department which was to have been used in the event that you were abolished.
Yes, Senator.
Okay, thank you. Now, how much of that are you allocating for the review of the carbon farming initiative that was recently announced?
I don't have an exact proportion, Senator, but we estimate that those two amounts of money would see us through until the middle of this financial year, or until the end of this financial year. That said, with the very large caveat that we're not quite sure what our ongoing statutory or other responsibilities might be, so that these things might change, but our estimates are that this would cover off on meeting our current statutory obligations, which are to provide a carbon farming initiative review by the end of this calendar year, which it's due on the 31st of December. So we're in mid-October already, so I don't have an exact proportion, but all of that funding we anticipate would last until the end of the financial year, subject to whatever it is that we may or may not be asked to do.
Okay, thank you. And so the first review I'd like to go to is the RET review. There are only 10 weeks remaining until the official RET review has to be completed by law. Has this process begun? And will you be able to complete this RET review in the time?
I might lead off, Senator. The answer is yes, we will complete the obligation and we will have a RET review. It will be a limited review in a sense because of the time constraints, but as well as that, we do have a fair bit of knowledge and experience about the RET arrangements from our initial report that was finished 18 months ago, a couple of years ago, and we will also have access to the public submissions that were made to the recent Warburton review and that report, and the analysis, the modelling that was done for that review. All of that will be part of the grist to our mill that we're working on for now.
So just in relation to the Warburton RET review, there's been a great deal of criticism of the modelling and the assumptions that went into that modelling. Will you be critiquing that modelling? Surely you won't be just accepting it on face value.
No, of course we'll be making our own judgments about the modelling results, and as you know, there's quite an array of modelling results out there, and we'll be weighing them all up and making judgments as to what we think are consistent with what the RET's intended to do to help decarbonise the electricity generating sector and contribute to reductions in emissions and all those kinds of things. But we will have the benefit of the submissions that have been made to the Warburton review, and a lot of the analysis that's in the report, which is the analysis in the report, is worth considering and weighing up, and we'll be doing that as well as doing our own, making our own independent judgments about all those things in that report.
Yes. Senator, I would add that we have had a look at of course, the modelling that was done for the Warburton Review, and it's largely consistent with the modelling that was done for our own 2012 review. So there's some updating of general assumptions and things like that, but it's not miles away from where we were in our 2012 modelling.
But some of the assumptions are quite interesting.
It's they're more consistent than not, Senator. So.
Okay. So I'd like to ask Mr Fraser, in terms of your decision to come out with a proposition for the government for a compromise on the current renewable energy target, why did you do that when your own review had said that the RET was appropriate as it is?
Well, that was a couple of years ago, and things move on, and one has to have regard to developments and as they occur. It was a comment that was made in the hope of contributing to some resolution of the wide gap in views about the RET arrangements, abolishing it on the one hand, but keeping it in place with some modifications. And if it came down to a choice of that kind, clearly, in my view anyhow, the latter choice was the preferred one, subject to the extent of the modifications that might be made. I take it you're referring to the suggestion I made that, well, maybe you can keep the existing objective of the large-scale RED scheme, but extend the target date out a couple of years. Is that what you had in mind?
That's right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, I was just interested that at the same time the Minister had said that there was 9,000 megawatts too much energy in the system, why you might not have considered that closing down some coal might have been more appropriate than cutting back on the RET.
Well, I think I actually made that suggestion as well in the course of those throwaway comments that I made in response to a question. But the reality was that things had changed, and things always change, and they had changed from the report that we prepared a couple of years ago, partly because of the uncertainty surrounding the RET itself, that there was doubt anyhow, at least in some of our minds, that we would see enough investment to deliver that 41,000 gigawatts. That was one important change compared to the earlier review. But the other important change was that the projections of electricity demand were being revised down all the time, and one couldn't ignore that.
No, which is why I'm saying there are options either to limit the RET or to close down some coal is an equally valid, well, in fact, I think more valid than to wind back a renewable energy target. But just to come to the actual review that you've just talked about, that you will complete your statutory obligation to have a review of the RET within the 10-week time frame, and that it'll be a limited review. What status will your proposition for cutting back on the renewable energy target have in the light of that review, or are they just personal comments and don't necessarily reflect the view of the review?
Oh, they certainly don't reflect the review of the review at this stage, because we're still in the early stages of making some progress on that review. But the thoughts have been picked up, and they'll be in some quarters, and they will be part of the overall assessment of the situation as we see it at this time.
Okay, so on the carbon farming initiative review, which you will do by the end of December, I understand, do you have any figures yet on the total number of people who are currently employed in the projects that have been approved under the carbon farming initiative?
No, Senator, we don't have those figures at the moment.
Okay, so what sort of things will you be looking at under the Carbon Farming Initiative review?
Senator, we released an issues paper yesterday, on Friday, that set out the areas of focus for this review. So I'm not sure if you've had a chance to look at that. We do have a copy here, which we're happy to table if that helps. We proposed Sorry?
That would be good if you
Yep,
could table it,
certainly.
please. Is that okay?
Oh, right one. Yes. So we propose to look at a broad range of issues in this review, including how it's travelled to date, including looking at CFI as it currently stands, but taking into account the proposed changes to those arrangements, and thinking about expansions of scope, among other things. What to be thinking about interactions between policy measures as well in all of that process.
Okay. So, so if you can just answer some questions about the board. How many board members have left since the change of government, and which board members have left?
4 members, sorry.
Yeah, so 4 authority members have left, and so that leaves the remaining 5 from the board of 9. So the members who have resigned have been John Marley, Heather Ridout, Alana Rubin, and Lynn Williams.
And will they be replaced, or is the board going to continue on as 5?
That's a matter for government, Senator.
You haven't. So, Minister, is there any decision been made about replacing those members of the board?
Senator, the government remains committed to the abolition of the authority, but of course, as you know, the legislation's so far not passed the Senate. You've addressed some of the issues around funding. The authority is, of course, undertaking its statutory requirements, and we're having a look at any matters in relation to board positions as a result of the delays in getting passage of the legislation.
So you are looking at it actively?
Well, it's a matter the government is aware of.
And if the government does proceed to appoint someone, will that be a cabinet decision, or is it purely a ministerial one?
The processes of government would be followed. I can't recall offhand the requirements of the legislation in this regard, but obviously they would be followed as well as proper government processes.
Thank you, Senator Milne. Senator Urquhart.
Thanks, Chair.